Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is our first ever lunchtime lecture. We're hosting this presentation midday in Seattle because our esteemed guest, Dr. Aala El-Khani, is joining us from Manchester, England. I'm sure I just butchered that name, but I will continue to try my best. The Center for Child and Family Wellbeing is pleased to be hosting today's lecture as part of our public lecture series that we are able to offer thanks to a very generous gift from the Moritz Family Foundation. I'm Liliana Lengua. I'm the director of the UW Center for Child and Family Wellbeing. Our lecture series is one way we share evidence-based information and practices to support child and family well-being. I would like to start this afternoon with a land and labor acknowledgement. We ask for everyone engaging in this event to reflect on the lands on which we reside, acknowledging all of the ancestral homelands and traditional territories of Indigenous peoples who have lived here for all of memory. The University of Washington acknowledges the Coast Salish peoples of this land. We offer our respect to the caretakers of these lands and honor their connections to the land, past, present, and future. We also acknowledge the enslaved peoples bought and sold into forced labor. We honor all the descendants of the victims and survivors of the transatlantic slave trade. We recognize that painful histories of white supremacy persist in present-day racial realities and privileges at this university and in our communities. We invite all to commit to dismantling racism and oppression where we live and work. Thank you for joining me in these acknowledgements. Before I introduce our speaker today, there are just a couple practical things I want to point out. We will have some time for questions and answers at the end of Dr. El-Khani's presentation. Please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to ask your questions. Please don't put your questions for Dr. El-Khani in the chat. Also, please type your questions as they come to you during the presentation, so they are queued up and ready to go at the end. Please use the chat for any technical problems or arise. If you need help from our team, they are monitoring the chat for your concerns. We are recording this lecture and we'll be sending it out in an email a few days after the lecture. It will also be available on our website, so please feel free to share it with others. After the lecture, you're also going to receive an email with a feedback survey, and we really appreciate your feedback. It helps us plan our future events. Okay, with that, I'd love to now introduce our esteemed speaker. Dr. El-Khani is a humanitarian psychologist dedicated to meeting the needs of caregivers and their families globally by conducting research, providing training, and evidence-informed resources. She has authored a number of family skills interventions and parenting resources for the United Nations Office on Drug and Crime, and as working as a consultant for numerous international organizations and academic institutions. Dr. El-Khani obtained her PhD in clinical psychology from the University of Manchester, where she is now a research associate and where she is presenting to us from today. She is a master trainer of several international psychosocial family skills and trauma recovery interventions, and is an expert at adapting and implementing these interventions in challenged settings, such as war and displacement contexts. She has led family skills training in over 15 countries. In particular, she has conducted field research with families in refugee contexts and conflict zones, exploring their parenting challenges and the positive impact parenting support can provide. She is passionate about highlighting the significant role that caregivers play in protecting their children during challenging times. Welcome, Dr. El-Khani. We're so pleased to have you here today. And with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon from a typically rainy and cold Manchester. It's actually evening for me and quite dark outside, so I have all my lights on around me. I hope it's doing justice. So it's a real pleasure to be with all of you. And I'd really like to thank the Child and Family Wellbeing Center at the University of Washington for inviting me to be with you. We've been speaking about it for quite a few months, so it's wonderful that now we're actually here and doing this event together. So yeah, I'm Aala, a humanitarian psychologist and global consultant, and I've been working for the past 12 years on researching the needs of families displaced by conflict, and in parallel, developing resources to meet this need. And I've been working specifically with the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime for the past 6 years, developing and implementing family skills programs for families around the world that have experienced many different kinds of challenges, particularly those who've experienced conflict and displacement. My work entails me being desk-based like this, working remotely most of the time, and then every 5 to 6 weeks, I travel to a new country and run family skills training and initiate program implementation. But really my most important role is that I'm also a mother, and I have 2 children, Sheda, who is almost 18. The almost part is significantly important, so we have to say almost 18, and Muhammad, who is 16. And let me give you a little bit of a backstory of how I became involved in this work and why I'm so passionate about it. In 2011, I was studying for a PhD at the University of Manchester, working on parenting, and then the Syrian conflict began. And I'm English, British born, raised in London, but I'm also of Syrian heritage. My parents are both from Syria originally. And the conflict in Syria, particularly early on, was really devastating for everyone, but really as a Syrian, I really felt it. I lost many relatives very early on in really horrifying ways. My husband is a trauma surgeon and would be away during the early part of the Syrian conflict for many, many weeks, and I'd be left looking after the children, parenting them alone. And I would be watching the news and the TV and these devastating scenes of war and of trauma, of parents looking petrified, heartbreaking scenes. And then my husband would come back and tell me really traumatic stories of physical and mental health tragedies that he'd witnessed. And I began to imagine how I would cope as a mother. I had 2 very young children then, how I would cope as a parent in that context. And what would I do? It was constantly on my mind. What would I do in that context? And this really led me to the journey of changing my PhD to explore the needs of families affected by conflict and how to support them. And this is how all of my work started in this field. So what I hope to do, next slide, please. What I hope to do in, oh, I should have said, yeah, next slide, please. That's the first one. The second one, please. Can be slow sometimes. I'll just keep talking till it works. So yeah, that's great. Thank you. So what I hope to do in my presentation is to plant some seeds of hope that despite the awful circumstances that surround some families, including those families that experience conflict globally, many of whom might join your communities and become resettled in the USA, that with the right tools and the resources, there is so much that we can do to empower them and to help them to lead fulfilling lives. And I know many of you joining today might come from a real wide range of backgrounds. I know there might be parents, psychologists, researchers, and those that work directly with children and their caregivers. So while I will be sharing the evidence base for a lot of these resources, I'm going to be focusing a lot on sharing open access tools and practical ideas of how we can use them. Just to note, though, that while my presentation will focus on supporting the needs of families that have experienced extreme stress due to conflict and displacement, research heavily indicates too that there is a significant parallel between the needs of families that have experienced other stress contexts too, like illness, a pandemic, community violence, a bad divorce, a natural disaster. So these messages that we'll be talking about today will be highly relevant for many, many different stress situations. Next slide, please. Okay, so the number of people globally, I'm just trying to, sorry, give me a moment. I'm just trying to see how it's looking for everybody. Yeah, perfect. Okay. So the number of displaced people globally due to war, political violence and other threats is on the rise. And I think we all know that. There's around 80 million refugees now around the world, which is actually a staggering figure. Forcibly displaced people. Refugees and internally displaced people often experience really high rates of mental health problems compared to local populations. In conflict-affected areas, around 1 in 5 people have significant mental health problems. And that's a lot. That's really a lot. That's much higher than in the non-refugee populations. Actually, that's around double. That's double the figure. Mental health problems are already a really neglected issue globally. And the common estimate is that there's around 13% of the world's population who experience mental health problems. But in refugees, this figure is double. And when we say mental health problems, these can be a real wide range of issues. And we can probably all relate to some of the words on this image, experiences such as experiences of these things over a prolonged time can be really debilitating and significantly reduce a person experiencing these ability to have a fulfilling life. So as we explore this presentation further, I'm going to be focusing specifically on the experience of the family as a preventative strategy, and I'll talk more about that as we go through. Next slide, please. So let's start by considering first what families will have gone through before they might be resettled in a country such as the USA. So I'm going to show you a few photos and we can reflect on these together. So here's the first photo. And this is one of many images of Syrians fleeing Aleppo in 2013. This is a typical image of many mass displacements around the world. Even recently, we've seen these images come out of Ukraine. We can see here fear, confusion, insecurity. It's a really horrible image. But imagine now being a parent. Imagine here being a civilian. What is going through your mind? Really take a moment to try to imagine. You're a mother, you might be a father, you're holding on to your child's hand really tightly. What are you thinking? Where can I find safety? How can I keep my children safe? Will I be going home anytime soon? Where am I going to sleep? Is there access to healthcare? Because right now my son is bleeding. What am I going to eat? So we have to meet these basic necessities before we can do anything else, because these civilians right now are in survival mode. Next slide, please. Okay, so how about this photo now? So here we have refugees living in camps. We've probably fast forwarded now a couple of months since the last photo. And those basic needs for shelter, for safety, for medical care that they had at the beginning will probably be met by now, or at least we hope. But is this a normal community where they're going to be able to live their lives and thrive? Probably not. My work in refugee camps in Syria has really highlighted that the displaced have many worries and feelings of anxiety, feelings of being isolated, feeling scared of what's happening now and of their future. Are these refugees going home soon? Not really. The families that might have arrived will have thought that they would be going home sometime soon, possibly. But as we know, many refugee contexts become prolonged displacement contexts, which can lead to real feelings of hopelessness and entrapment as their options to leave begin to get smaller and smaller. So this is where we really see different mental health and family problems begin to arise, like child abuse, substance abuse, physical and sexual violence. Next slide, please. So what about now? These are refugees. They could be Afghan, Ukrainian, Syrian, African, and they've now arrived in the USA, let's say. So if this was you, what would you now need? They've got a safe roof over their heads. Their immediate needs like shelter, food, healthcare have been taken care of to a degree. They might have reached the realization that they're actually not going home. This is their new home. And this is probably the stage where you will be having your first encounters with them. But war isn't selective. A child in this photo, for example, might have been living underground for weeks, under bombardment and in great danger. Or at the same time, she might have been picked up very quickly and whisked out of danger ahead of an advancing army. Or she might previously have enjoyed a really warm, a harmonious home, and one with significant risk factors for her mental health. We just don't know. So in planning interventions for families, it's really important as a first step to explore what family life might have been like for these families, before the displacement, as well as the child and family's experience through conflict, flight, displacement, and then resettlement. It's also really important to recognize the specific conditions of war experienced. Families respond in really different ways when they find themselves under threat compared to when they're actually in danger for their lives. So under threat, families can actually become more warm and overprotective, but then under threat, when there's extreme circumstances of attack and displacement, caregivers can become less warm, they can become harsher. And these levels of parental stress can be a really important driver in child abuse and mental health problems for their children. And it's this stage really where we begin treating the family as someone who is not going back. And families might still be in denial of what the future holds for them, or they might simply be unsure. And we certainly can't predict what's going to happen to families. But at this stage, we have a real duty of care to provide for them all the possible physical, practical, and psychosocial services that they might need. Next slide, please. Increased vulnerability of mental health problems for refugees is linked to pre-migration experiences, as well as experiences in transit and in the final country of transit too. And the uncertainty of the future really carries a heavy weight on the minds of refugees, and this can be really detrimental to their mental health. And you can see here, a refugee's journey is never simple, which is why supporting them at every level of their displacement is really important. And even when refugees are resettled in high-income countries like the UK or the USA, this can still be experienced as war after war, when they don't have the right psychosocial support to develop the skills to process and recover from the experiences that they've been through to lead healthy and fulfilling lives. Next slide, please. So family is a social institution that is so important in the lives of children, and we very often underestimate the role of the family in the prevention of so many outcomes, though it's incredibly important. There's an assumption that caregivers automatically know how to parent their children, but actually it's really not that easy. And any of us here who are caregivers know that children don't come with manuals. It's really can be complex, particularly at different stages in our children's development. There are so many changes that we need to make as we watch our children change too. And the relationship that children have with their caregivers is the primary most important factor in their future well-being. That's in their mental and in their emotional development, and really significantly in reducing the likelihood of them becoming engaged in risky behaviors like drug misuse, criminal activity, sexual experiences that could be harmful. So people often say, I'm working for UNODC. Why is UNODC so heavily working on prevention via the use of parenting programs? Well, actually, because we know that the relationships that children have with their caregivers is the root and can be the biggest protector for children in not engaging in risky behaviors like drug misuse in the future. Next slide, please. So all families in all contexts can benefit from family skills resources that promote family protective factors like trust, problem solving skills, conflict resolutions, and families that engage in parenting information are much more likely to have better mental health, physical and social outcomes in the future. But what about families that are experiencing significant stress or challenged circumstances? Families living in a reception center, families with an ill family member, families that are going through a really tough divorce, families going through a global pandemic. That was all of us. Families living through war. Research tells us that families need the same things that they need outside of stress context, which we've just talked about. But at the same time, they need a real focus on different ways to strengthen their family protective factors, such as dealing with adult and child stress, different techniques of stress management. We really focus on the importance of listening and communication with children and caregivers, and focusing on the value of using both love and limits in our approach to parenting. and also ways to encourage the positive behavior we want from our children, and techniques to discourage misbehavior and unwanted behavior. Next slide, please. But what if we consider families that have experienced conflict and displacement? Well, the role of the caregiver now is even further magnified and is sometimes the only support institution that remains in the lives of children. Sometimes that is what the family is to the child, the only support that remains when everything else is gone. But sadly, research tells us that sometimes children that have experienced conflict, their caregivers are much more likely to be more abusive or violent with them as well and put their children at risk, even though we know that children can be protected by warm, secure parenting. And this is why at UNODC, we've been focusing for many years on developing parenting resources for families that have been facing such experiences. Next slide, please. So we've said family resources a few times now, or family skills programs, but what are family skills programs? Well, they're resources that aim to strengthen family protective factors like conflict resolution, the importance of listening and communicating, and many of the other things that I've spoken about before. They really focus on the relationship and behavior change, and they have a very big focus on practice as well. And families that take part in such programs are much more likely to have better outcomes in the future. Next slide, please. Also, supporting families is really cost effective, and research shows us that there's a return of almost $10 for every dollar spent implementing family skills programs as a preventative strategy. So that always is a wonderful slide to bring up when talking to policymakers. Next slide, please. I spent a lot of my early career conducting field research in refugee camps in Syria and Turkey, often just sitting with families in their tents and asking them how they were coping and what they needed support with in caring for their children. Along with colleagues, we've explored the needs of refugees in high-income countries too, like the UK, and we find a very similar theme that caregivers are massively struggling to care for their children, whatever stage they are in their journey to resettlement. Whatever stage, there is always a struggle with trying to understand the new needs of their children and what they can do about it. Children can become more aggressive, more withdrawn, more depressed, and often parents have no idea how to deal with these changes. And when you think about it, how would they know? And where would they seek support from? Because everyone around them in these refugee camps and in the new areas they find themselves are just like them. They're all struggling with the same issues, and they're not sure of where to get support from. Next slide, please. So in response to this identified gap of a lack of family skills resources that are evidence-based, but most importantly, open sourced, and over many number of years, at UNODC, we've developed this pyramid or model of intervention to promote strong family relationships within families and good mental health for children and for their caregivers as a preventative strategy. So we brought about these tools along with other resources to provide a stepped model for parenting through challenge settings. And we've developed this model of family multi-level parenting support delivery. And at every level that you can see, families can be provided with family skills support, depending on how much resources the area that they're residing in has, and how much need there is for such resources. And I'm going to touch on every one of these steps very briefly to give you an idea of what the resources are and how you can use them practically in your work. Recognizing, so if we look at the bottom of the model here in yellow, we recognize how all families can benefit from really basic parenting information. So on a very universal level, the bottom level here in yellow are very light touch parenting skill tools that can be distributed at a really wide range to all families. Next slide, please. So in that bottom level, we have things like these leaflets. So for example, we developed and distributed a parenting information leaflet in a conflict zone in Syria, many of whom were internally displaced. And this led to a really unique trial called the bread wrapper study that we've published, in which we posted 3,000 urgent parenting advice leaflets and also feedback questionnaires to families in this conflict zone. And these leaflets had different information on how to support their children, what they might be experiencing as caregivers, what their children might be experiencing as caregivers, advice such as the importance of providing warmth, giving praise, spending time with their children, trying, even through living through a conflict zone, to maintain some kind of routine and to play with their children. And we distributed this to a really large number of families. We were astonished to have an almost 60% response rate in a war zone, really highlighting how families wanted and were able to engage with parenting information because of such a high need. And for the questionnaires that we sent out, the majority rated the overall usefulness of the leaflets as quite a lot or a great deal. And we had many comments left on them wanting even more support. These leaflets have been distributed now in many different contexts around the world, in many, many different languages. And this is available for anyone here who wants them to. Next slide, please. So, as I said, they've been translated. I'm going to send you lots of links to where you can find all of these tools. But we also have these leaflets as video recordings as well. And these are really wonderful. Wherever you're working with families, you can send these videos which support, low levels of literacy, or just support the fact that families often engage more with video recordings. We've sent these out via WhatsApp applications, via many different kinds, to reach families at a really wide level. And this is something that you can do too. With the links that I'm going to send out, you can provide families with a really wide range of resources through video material. Next slide, please. We also have a Listen First website on the UNODC program, and this has many resources as well that are short videos, short resources as well that you can access in many, many different languages. Of course, refugees will come from all parts of the world, so we will need to have access to this information in many different languages. So those of you with access to families, you will be able to find here a wide range of videos in many languages that, as I said, you can send out as links to caregivers, or invite caregivers to your schools, to your community centers, and present them with these videos too. Next slide, please. Another really wonderful initiative that I want to share with you that sits at the bottom of our model as universal messages is this booklet for children and for caregivers, and it's called The Positive Life Journey. It starts with me. And this is almost like a journal that children who have been displaced can complete. There's also a caregiver version, but this is the child version. The child completes all these different pages that really help them diary what they've been through, things like what they took along with them in their journey, the hardest part of their journey, moments where they smiled, moments that brought them sadness or happiness. And the aim of it is that these activities and exercises that had been developed help to trigger a process of positive change within the children and the caregivers, and to move on with their future in their new home. This has already proven enormously popular with refugees. It was developed specifically now for the Ukrainian context, but I so wish this was available many, many years ago. I've seen so many Syrian refugee children, for example, who have really lost contact with those initial feelings that they had towards the nice feelings that they had towards their homeland and towards their country and towards their culture, because they didn't have a chance to write these down and to really save these kinds of moments and memories. So this can be a wonderful gift, really, and it's all free to access, to download and to print and to provide with children who you might be in contact with in your different organizations. Next slide, please. So back to our model, and feedback from caregivers who received the light touch resources at the bottom of the model was that they wanted more advice. So the next level up here in green takes us to areas where we have more resources and more stable environments. Next slide, please. And here we've developed a light touch intervention that consists of a parenting booklet and associated conversation group seminar. So parents attend a workshop, a school, a community center, anywhere you can group families of up to 30 to 50 families. And here they would receive a booklet, one of these versions of the booklet, which has information that demonstrates key parenting information in a really simple and engaging way, such as how to build parental confidence and self-regulatory skills, and how to enhance child and family well-being. As well as receiving the booklet, caregivers take part in a 2-hour conversation group, and you as a facilitator can access a number of different notes and resources that will help any person with no particular psychological or social work background to run these really simple conversation groups with families. And again, these have been very popular around the world, and we have them translated into many languages. And I would really urge those of you working with families to think about really simple ways of inviting families to your schools, to your community centers, and engaging them to initiate conversations on parenting and developing parenting skills. Next slide, please. In this next slide, we look at the themes inside these kinds of booklets. We have many different versions, as we just saw. We really start off by messages of normalizing to caregivers the challenges they might be experiencing and the challenges that their children might be experiencing too, how they can help themselves and how they can help their children. We also focus on specific messages like aggression, sleep disturbances, focusing too on the needs of teenagers. And we put particular focus on how the needs of teenagers and their desire for more control over their life and independence is really important to fulfill as well. So these are just to give you an idea of the basic themes of the tools. Next slide, please. The next level up of our model here sits multi-session programs. So we're going up the model now, and as we go up the model, the programs become more intensive. So this is particularly useful for communities that have the realization now that this displacement is probably going to be long-term. So this is usually where families are resettled, and support will be needed in the long term for families. And we now can afford to do multi-session work because families are staying in one place long enough to meet them over a number of weeks. Next slide, please. So one example of such a program is the Strong Families program, and it's an evidence-based UNODC multi-session family skills program, and it's a universal intervention. So it's designed for all families that have experienced some kind of stress, and as we said, any family could fall under that category, and for caregivers to have children aged between 8 and 14 years old. And the aim of it is to improve parenting skills, child well-being, and family mental health. So for this program, children and caregivers attend the program together over 3 weeks. And the real key features of this program is that it's designed for families who are experiencing challenging contexts. So it's designed to be really brief. It's only run over 3 weeks, so 3 sessions. It's light, so it requires a really light, cheap, basic infrastructure to run as well. And it's really easy to mobilize and train. And the training is aimed at lay people with no necessary background in psychology or social work. And the materials used are really minimal as well. I've run training myself now in over 25 countries for this program, and we have multiple publications on the efficacy of this program. So for those of you interested, I can share those with you too. Though we usually run this program in low resource contexts, what we've now reached the stage of doing is that there is so much interest of running this program in high income countries, like in Europe and in the UK. And we're currently beginning to explore implementing with Afghan refugees in Manchester, for example. The reason being is that the UK and Europe, and from what I'm hearing from colleagues, also the USA, is that the health systems are really overburdened and waiting lists for any kind of support are enormous, and funding is tight, and for any of the kind of healthcare, whether physical and mental health. So having such programs, which are really easy to mobilize, don't require highly specific trained people, that have no royalty fees, is incredibly attractive, and is something that we're really looking at expanding now in high income countries as well. To take part in these programs, all you really need to do is to take part in the training, and then that's it. The program is yours to run for absolute free in your communities. Let's look at this program in a bit more detail. So next slide, please. So here we have the different sessions that take place in the program. As we said, we have caregiver sessions, child sessions. independently, and then we have sessions where the families come together. And here we can see the different kinds of themes that we explore. Looking at, for the caregivers, looking at how to use love and limits in their parenting, looking at how to develop their communication skills with their children. Children, on the other hand, look at how they can improve, learn skills to deal with their own stress. They begin to understand the importance of roles and responsibilities in their lives. And in the family sessions, there's lots of wonderful practice between children and caregivers as they begin to put into place all the skills they've been learning independently. Next slide, please. As I said, we've been implementing this around the world now. Here are some photos from Zanzibar and the Dominican Republic. Next slide, please. We've been to the Philippines, Indonesia. Last month, I was in Sudan and Tunisia, and next week I will be in Burkina Faso running training, and then straight to Mauritania to run training. So it's really wonderful that there is so much interest and so much evidence base of the importance of this program. And it's wonderful now that so many countries and communities and ministries around the world are really becoming aware of the importance of utilizing family skills as a preventative strategy. Next slide, please. Of course, we have a real strong evidence base now to Strong Families program, and we have multiple publications, as I said, and we have a protocol of how we conduct evaluations for all of the cycles that we implement around the world, with pre-measures and post-measures, which look at child behavior, family functioning, and parenting, as an evaluation strategy. Next slide, please. I'm only going to share with you 2 slides. I'm trying to be as light as I can with slides and the research side. But for this slide, for example, here we have the study we did in Afghanistan, where we had 72 families take part. And here we're looking at the SDQ, which looks at child problem behavior. And we can see that children in the study, the majority of them began in the very high, the orange category. And by the end of the study, so after the intervention, and then even 6 weeks after the intervention, these children, the majority of them, were very comfortably in the normal category. So really big improvements in child behavior. Next slide, please. Here we're going to look specifically at the children who began the program in the really high category. These were almost half of the children in the sample began with a lot of significant problem behavior. And all of these children, by the end of the program, had significant improvements in their behavior and sat comfortably in the normal behavior category. And what we can see, and we see this across the board in our implementation around the world, is that not just is there an improvement at the end of the program, the improvement continues to get better and better after. And this is what we see with parenting skills. You need to keep practicing, and the more you practice, the better your parenting and your children's improvements are. Next slide, please. So back to our model now. What about interventions for children who need more specific, tailored trauma recovery support due to many things like war or trauma for other life events that require trauma recovery? Things like being through tragedies in life, living through hard family circumstances, many different kinds of trauma that children will live through. They will need more specialized support. And this is the tip of our model in red. And I'm pretty certain that many of you who work directly with families who have been through extreme stress contexts will see a real wide range of trauma symptoms in children and their caregivers. And one of the main benefits of utilizing light touch resources that I mentioned earlier, like the leaflets and the booklets and the multi-session work, is to identify who needs more support, who needs this more support right at the top, and the more specialized support that comes from specialized professionals. This is why we work with families at every level to identify who needs this specialized support. Next slide, please. And at the tip of our model here sits the Children in War program, Teaching Recovery Techniques, TRT. And this is an evidence-based trauma recovery program that's used globally around the world. And this program is for children who have been through man-made or natural disasters and traumas. And the original intervention has sessions specifically for children on trauma recovery. I'm going to go more shortly in detail of the components of this, but what we did at the University of Manchester was to add a whole stream of sessions to this program on parenting. So now, rather than just the children taking part in the child trauma recovery, in the edited version, the TRT plus parenting, parents will also take part in trauma recovery work and parenting skills at the same time as well. And we've piloted this in Syria and in Turkey and in Lebanon. Next slide, please. These are the main components. You can see we work on intrusive thoughts, arousal, and avoidance. These are key components of focus. And there are many wonderful exercises that support children to recover from these, while at the same time their caregivers take part in trauma recovery too. Next slide, please. This is a wonderful image. We do a lot of sleep hygiene work in the trauma recovery program. And one of the exercises works on children and on the nightmares that they have. And we ask them to think of their nightmare. And by the end of the activity, children are able to think of a happy ending to their nightmares. And here you can see these children, this child here, refugee child, has drawn an airplane dropping gifts, excuse me, rather than the bombs, which is what their initial nightmare used to be. Next slide, please. And these are the components that caregivers take part in the parenting sessions. I won't go into much detail, but these are the key evidence-based components that we see throughout all of the interventions that we've mentioned before as well. Next slide, please. So one slide only on results, and there are many publications that you can look at for this, but we did a randomized controlled trial where we compared caregivers and children in 3 arms, Lebanon. These are refugee families. We compared using the TRT program itself, which is just the child trauma recovery program, using a wait list, so nothing, or using the enhanced version, so the trauma recovery program for the children plus the parenting sessions. And in every category and every tool we use to measure, for example, recovery from intrusive thoughts, avoidance, mental health difficulties, we found that, of course, there was a significant improvements in the category or the arm of the child's trauma recovery, but most significantly when caregivers were also supported with parenting skills. So the TRT in itself improved the children's recovery and the caregiver's well-being, but when you add parenting session, the improvement is much more significant. Next slide, please. So in summary, we need to make use of this really wonderful protective shield that caregivers can be for their children through early development and through adolescence, really recognizing their importance even more during stressful times. And we can do this by ensuring access to family skills resources. And caregivers are often already motivated and are seeking help. They just need to be supported and empowered and given opportunities of how they can find help. And we know that family programs can be delivered even in really challenging contexts when we have the right tools. But there's also a real need to make these resources light and flexible so that we can adapt to the different needs that we find ourselves facing. There are other programs, of course, and resources available, and you might be familiar with many of these too, and be practitioners and even work with these programs. And this image here really shows that the idea of this work that we're doing at UNODC is to really develop and widen the toolbox of family skills programs globally, to have tools that have no royalty fees and are much lighter. And you can pick and choose which skills and which tools will be most useful for you in whatever context you're working in. I'm just going to take one more minute and just really focus on the importance, next slide please, and really focus on the importance of taking care of ourselves. There is an enormous burden, a mental health burden on those who look after others and support others who have been through traumatic and challenging times. So it's really important that we advocate in our organizations, in our communities, for ourselves and for others, through legislation and through training for well-being, and to have steps in place to have a really holistic support system for ourselves and for our staff in whatever organization we're working in. Because certainly it can't be easy to support others through their journey of recovery and through their journey of having a better life. So by availing these tools that we've just spoken to, we're we're playing a really big role, and it's only fair that we also look after ourselves at the same time. Thank you for your attention. Last slide, please. I will provide a link to all the tools I just mentioned. I'd like to thank you for your attention and for your engagement, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Aala. That's really encouraging and inspiring when we think about supporting parents. I often have asked, do they really need parenting interventions, parenting support when they're in these really difficult contexts? And your work really tells us how important it is for themselves and for their children. So I really appreciate that. And thank you for contextualizing your work. Just a really critical piece. There are already several questions, and I'll read them for you. If others, in case you missed the instructions at the beginning, your questions can be typed into the Q&A box. I'll read through them. One person has asked, how do you address the cultural background in relation to parenting skills that you're trying to teach to a family in crisis?
That's a great question. Before piloting in any new country, we have a whole phase where we work very closely with the field country, excuse me, and we understand the needs and the context that we're going to work in. The program is evidence-based, so we never change the key components of the program, but what we do to meet cultural needs of different contexts is we change the imagery, we change the language, we change the examples we give to make sure that they're culturally acceptable. And this is a really important pilot phase that we go through before we implement in large numbers. And this is only done really through working with field teams. So yes, we have our own ideas and we know the science of cultural adaptation, but this is only through working with field teams who are experts on their own culture and on the families. And through the training process with facilitators, we bring this up very often. And then through the piloting as well, this is a big part, both qualitative and quantitative data on cultural appropriateness and acceptability is a big part of our pilot phase in each country.
Thank you. That's really valuable. And then there are two questions that are somewhat related. One is for the Strong Families program, what are the prerequisites for potential facilitators? Wondering if they have to have
a great question.
Background counsel.
So the great thing about the program is, no, you do not need to have any, we rely more on facilitator skills. So facilitators who are confident, are happy to be standing in front of groups of people, are engaging, believe in the work that they're doing, who are happy to take the program and use it exactly as it's presented rather than change anything. So this is what we focus a lot on the training. The idea is that you don't need to have any special background, and this is what makes it such a light resource, is that you don't have to have a large number of facilitators who have particular skills. And the training is very intensive in that way. And also the manual is written in a way that's really easy to train with. So it's got everything you need. There's been experts involved in even the visualization of the manual, so that somebody who picks it up can actually read from it to implement. And we, in the training, ask the facilitators to stay as close to the manual as possible as well. So of course, having a background in psychology or social work is always an advantage, but we've trained people around the world who have been school teachers or who have been even caregivers who took part in the cycle of Strong Families and were fantastic and charismatic. We then went on to train them to become facilitators themselves. So it can even empower local communities as well.
Yeah, that's great. And as you're talking, I'm thinking, how do you screen the people who are going to eventually be facilitators? But you give a great description of what makes a great. Yeah.
And it's usually in country. So when a new country would want some training, they will choose people who they think are most appropriate. So when we arrive to the country, we'll have given them the criteria, and then we will meet them based on the criteria that we give, which is the facilitator skills. And it's mostly about those who can access families. So you must have access to families in your day-to-day job to be able to pilot this in your country to begin with.
Yeah, and that's somewhat related to the next question. I think people are already thinking, oh, how do we do this in the Seattle area? And what we see is this sort of task sharing model, this model of giving tools to people who are already there working with the families. We don't see that so much in the United States or in our areas. And so really just wanting to see how we can expand that kind of model in a setting like, the US or UK. So are you seeing use of that with licensed volunteer mental health workers or, people who are in that community health worker position?
Yeah, I mean, around the world, UK, Europe, and other areas around the world now, it's becoming more popular, as I said, because the health systems are becoming so overburdened. But all around the world, people who have existing roles supporting families, it could be even in the treatment component of challenges, but we're working on prevention here. So it's families, anyone who has access to families. It could be people in community centers, teachers, those who are welcoming refugees, for example, as long as they have access and can group families. And we find schools are a great place to start. In some countries, of course, we have children outside school, but in the US, in the UK, for example, all children are registered in school. So piloting a first cycle of strong families by engaging with a school is really a fantastic strategy to bring the program into your community.
That's great. There's a question here about secondary guilt of the mental health professionals and supervision of providers. Do you have any resources or thoughts about that?
Resources, there are many online, so please have a Google search. I know every organization should have these. If they don't, please advocate for your organization to bring in specialized training. There are many organizations around the world, I'm sure some will be local to you, who will be able to provide this. What I realized in my own personal experience and in the global experience is that sometimes organizations have these in place, but we just don't know about it. So it's not unless somebody is sick, does HR let you know that actually there's a whole, there's a whole stream of sessions or resources that you can access. So please, if you are working in a place or an area where you are working with families and you could be experiencing secondary trauma yourself and all of the challenges that come with working with people who are struggling all day and then having to go home and live your own life, it's really important that you look after yourself. And it's not just our responsibility, it's the responsibility of those who we are working for. So please do advocate. And there are many, many ways you can do that and resources that you can find online for that. But it's really important. I don't know anybody who works in this field who hasn't had a dip in their own mental health at one point. It's just the reality of it. I know myself, I've struggled at some points with panic attacks and anxiety. And really, I think it's an outcome of the extreme stress of seeing other people challenges. And it's really hard to park that. As humans, you do absorb some of that sometimes.
Definitely. And, I loved your image of you can only pour from a full cup. And we don't often think about the providers and the caregivers in that setting, parents and providers. One person is asking for an example or two of the stress management or emotion regulation skills that are incorporated in your programs.
So we focus on slow and gentle breathing. So we do a lot of work on breathing in the program, both with the children individually, with the caregivers individually, and then when we bring the families together in the family session, we do lots of techniques with them together. We also do tapping. Those of you who might be familiar, but there's different focal points on our body and on side of our hand, and we tap to relieve stress, and this is a really heavily evidence-based strategy as well that we use with families. So those are the two main strategies, tapping and breathing.
Thanks, that's great.
The idea is that you don't need to bring anything externally because there are such low resources that you are relying on your own personal toolbox of tools, and we're developing these in our interventions.
Yeah, and tools that people can use in the moment as they're interacting, as they're acting, making their way through their experiences. Yeah. That's wonderful. And then there's a question here about, do you have any resources or data where you've kept track of people beyond the short-term follow-up? Do we know how families are doing, children and families are doing 3 or 5 years later or anything like that?
We don't, unfortunately, and that's something we're working on. We now have an online platform of training and we're developing an app. And the whole idea behind the app is that we can do these long-term follow-ups. So this is our goal for 2023, really, is to complete the development of our app so we can have long-term research. This would be key. So far, we have 6-month and 3-month follow-ups. But our goal is most certainly to see, and we've seen improvements as time goes by. So to have a longer term follow-up would be really wonderful.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing that. And we are getting a lot of questions about Ukrainian resources in Ukraine and in Russian. We've had a lot of refugees settle in this area, and people are asking about support. And someone here has said they already searched the website and haven't seen it in that.
Okay, let me post right now while I'm speaking. My eyes will divert somewhere else, but I'm with you. We have a lot of our resources now in Ukrainian. It was a mad rush a couple of months ago to translate all the resources into Ukrainian. We have leaflets, we have the booklets, we have video material, we have the materials I showed you, the lovely image of the suitcase for children as well. There are so many things in Ukraine. I'm going to send the link into the chat and you can have a look at it in your own time. And here you will find all the resources that I mentioned. If someone can click on it and let me know that that link has taken you to the right page, that would be wonderful. But yeah, you can find it all here in Ukrainian and many other languages as well.
Thank you. I opened that. It looks good.
Is it the page? Perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
And I just am so just in awe of the amount of resources, the access to the resources and the support, and just your commitment to this work is really inspiring. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And for anybody who's still here, okay, it looks like the link didn't go to everyone, but I have it, and we will include it in an email that goes out afterwards, that all the resources you talked about. If you're registered for this presentation, you'll be getting an email. Yeah, I think the link is going to the panelists instead of everyone.
Okay.
We'll make sure to send that out to everyone at the end of the lecture. Thank you so much. This is really, really inspiring, and your work is really just pushes us to really think about how to support parents in difficult situations and in creative and different ways that we don't seeing here in the United States necessarily as much, how we can adopt those here. Yeah, there's a great comment here. You are a blessing, and I would just want to echo that.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be with you. The fact that you brought up this topic and you're engaging in it, and the fact that there are so many people who want to know more and to use the resources is in itself such a pleasure. So thank you for your engagement, and please do look at the resources. You will find my contact details there too. If anyone wants any access to these programs, we can do online training, we can do face-to-face training. I mean, it's all open access. So please do use this as much as you need to. At UNODC, would be really happy to see this go to your communities and help those that you're supporting. So thank you for your efforts too.
Thank you for your generosity. If we were in person, we would all have a round of applause, and thank you in that way. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, everyone. Please remember that you'll be getting an email, and this is an opportunity to give us feedback and input about what we do in the future, future presentations like this one. And with that, we'll close this session. Thank you so much. And you're getting lots of praise and love in the
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.